the woods in North America, and the trees started to grow due to climate change. They have to go out to get food in the prairie, and then they have to face big predators, cats, so they have to run. So through the generations, they became a little bit bigger, and after thousands of years, they became what we know today. And the strategy that Kovalevsky discovered is that animals, also human beings, creatures, we fundamentally don't change. If we become successful when we face disruptions, it's because, like the horses, we rely on skills, on strengths, on assets that we already have. If you start to improvise, if you see a species in evolution that starts to do something that is completely different from what they were doing before, usually the species will disappear. It's only when they rely on their strengths that they actually grow stronger.
Yeah. So what's interesting is there's a lot of talk about this in the business world, where and again the term disruption is used a lot in the tech world, where there's now faster, more agile companies coming up who are trying to disrupt what large corporations are doing, and only for corporations to survive or the established companies is to disrupt themselves in a way. Have you come across a way for people to, in a similar way, disrupt themselves without having to go through like a complete collapse?
Yes, and you mentioned just a minute ago Albert Schweitzer, and this is one of the best examples I found in history, because Schweitzer made a career transition that was very radical. He used to be a professor of theology in Strasbourg in France, and he became a missionary in Africa. And you cannot imagine a bigger change in his life. I mean, the guy had to quit his job. He was making a very good, earning a very good living, and everybody told him he was crazy. And then he had the risk of losing everything. And the way he did it addresses the question, because he did it in a very clever way. He quit his job. He went to Africa. He became a physician just to be able to work in Africa. But when he went to Africa, he took with him an upright piano. Why? Because Schweitzer used to play organ in the cathedral every Sunday. He was a very good performer, and he followed the strategy that said, "Look, if I lose everything, if the adventure in Africa becomes a disaster," and very, very often he was close to disaster, he could always go back to Europe and play music. And he thought, if I lose everything, I can still keep my musical skills. So he bought this second-hand piano, took it with him to Africa. He was playing in Africa, in West Africa, every day for an hour. And you can imagine what a surrealistic picture he would get in Africa playing piano. But he did it for years, for the rest of his life. And when he ran out of money, which happened very often, he would go back to Europe and play music in cathedrals and raise money for his hospital. So this is the perfect strategy for people and for companies to evolve. You have to keep always a backup plan, a backup scheme that will pull you through the bad times. And this is what Schweitzer did very, very cleverly. And I found the story super interesting. I put it in the book because it shows you the perfect strategy to minimize disruptions.
Yeah, that's great. So in your own life, in your own work and career, what would you say has been the best advice or the best strategy that you've ever had?
Yeah, the best strategy is to try to do things in little pieces. And this goes, one of my hobbies, career skills is to learn languages. Mm-hmm. And I've been doing this already for decades. But you have to do it little by little. You cannot just go and say, okay, I'm going to learn, Russian or French in a week. It's very unrealistic, and people become discouraged. And this is why relatively few people speak second or third languages fluently, because they give up. They become very discouraged. So it's the same when you write books or when you try to pursue any complex goal. You have to break it down into pieces, and you have to do every day 10 minutes, 15 minutes, half an hour, wherever you can, so that it will eventually pile up into an achievement. And this is for most people, it's not easy to accept that you have to work at these big things little by little.
Yeah, no, that's great. And so with your, in your life and your work, because again, you're a very prolific writer, how do you approach those times when you're fearful? And maybe it's a new subject or even the first time you wrote a book. How do you look at fear in general, and how do you push past it?
I follow always the same methodology that I discuss this methodology in the book about stress. I try to focus on objective steps instead of becoming very emotional. Say, okay, I really am stressed, I'm very anxious. I try to make a very simple plan of steps I have to follow. If I, for instance, I imagine, okay, I want to write the next book, or I want to embark on a very difficult career steps, I would just break it down into little pieces, and I would do the piece every day, regardless of the environment, regardless of my emotions or feelings. I just follow the plan. And I know that this works. I've been doing this for decades. You have to leave these wild emotions aside, because otherwise, if you only work when you feel like it, you're going to be very ineffective.
Okay, great. John, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me this morning. I really appreciate it. If the listeners would like to, first off, buy your books, read more of your writing, see what you're up to, where are the best places they can go to do that?
Super easy to find. If you just type John Vespasian on Google, you will find my blog. There are hundreds of articles there. There is a free newsletter, and of course the books are easily available on Amazon. Mm-hmm. Very, very easy to find. Just type John Vespasian on Google.
Absolutely, that's awesome. Thank you so much. I will make sure I put links in the show notes so that listeners can click right through and find your books and find your blog.
Many thanks.
Thank you for listening to another episode of the Advance Your Art podcast. If you like this episode, please go into iTunes and give us a 5-star rating. And while you're there, hit the subscribe button so that every single time I release a new episode, it will go directly to you without even thinking about it. If you're interested in hearing older episodes, please go to advanceyourart.com, where you can find the catalog of everything I've done so far, as well as contact information and projects I'm working on. Thank you again, and have a great day.